Commander Xelur was a name that echoed through the halls of the Salvor Empire, like a legend carved into the fabric of time itself. Known for his unparalleled tactical genius, unyielding determination, and ruthless drive, he had led his people through countless battles and emerged victorious time and again. His reputation as a warrior was legendary, and his forces were feared across the galaxy. The Salvor Empire had expanded under his command, conquering star systems with military precision and crushing any opposition in their wake. Yet despite his status, Xelur had always understood the price of victory, the lives lost, the sacrifices made, and the moral compromises required to maintain control. However, in the eyes of his people, he was the embodiment of strength and honor, someone who had led them to the peak of power. To the galaxy's enemies, he was a tyrant, a symbol of oppression and conquest that had to be brought down at any cost. But Xelur wasn't one to focus on the views of others. His loyalty to the Salvor Empire was absolute. His every action was driven by a singular mission, to secure the future of his people, no matter the cost. Yet, as the war raged on, something inside Xelur began to shift. A growing unease stirred within him, something that gnawed at the edges of his consciousness. His forces were becoming more ruthless, more destructive with each passing battle. What had started as a quest for power and security for his people had slowly morphed into a campaign of conquest, one that showed no sign of stopping. The galaxy had become a battleground, and Xelur's forces had left devastation in their wake. Star systems were burning, alien species were being decimated, and the very fabric of the galaxy seemed to be unraveling under the weight of his empire's expansion. In those quiet moments when he allowed himself to reflect, Xelur questioned the true cost of the Empire's rise. Was it worth it? Was it worth the lives of countless innocents, or had they crossed a line that could never be uncrossed? It was in the midst of this internal conflict that Xelur received his final mission. The order came from the highest echelons of the Salvor Empire, from those who believed that the galaxy should be brought under total control, no alliances, no compromises. The mission was simple but devastating in its implications. Commander Xelur was to lead an assault on a critical star system that held the key to securing ultimate victory for the Empire. There, hidden within the enemy's most fortified planet, was an ancient artifact, an artifact of unimaginable power. It was said to possess the ability to manipulate entire star systems, to bend the very fabric of reality itself to the user's will. Legends of its power had existed for centuries, but it had always been thought to be a myth, a mere story passed down by those who sought to inspire fear in their enemies. However, intelligence reports had confirmed its existence, and it was now within the Salvor Empire's grasp, waiting to be claimed. The artifact had been hidden by a coalition of alien species who had banded together to keep its power from falling into the wrong hands. It was said to be capable of turning the tide of any war, of giving its wielder the power to control not just the galaxy, but the very nature of space itself. The implications of such power were staggering. With it, the Salvor Empire would not just dominate the galaxy, it would reshape it according to their vision. No rebellion could stand against them, no alliance could oppose them, and no enemy would ever dare challenge their rule again. The galaxy would fall to their will, and Xelur would be the one to ensure that it happened. The mission was clear: the artifact had to be secured at all costs. Xelur knew this would be his last mission. The price of failure was not just personal. If the artifact fell into enemy hands, the Salvor Empire would be left vulnerable to destruction. For all his internal conflicts, Xelur could not allow that to happen. His people had come too far, sacrificed too much, and fought too hard to let it all slip away. He had devoted his entire life to the Empire, and this would be the culmination of everything he had worked for. There could be no hesitation, no second guessing. This was the moment that would define his legacy. As Xelur prepared to lead his fleet to the target system, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The mission felt too simple, too perfect. It wasn't like any other mission he had undertaken before, where the outcome was uncertain, and the cost could be measured in lives lost. This felt different. There was a sense of finality in the air, as though the galaxy itself was holding its breath. He had been given the order, and he would follow it, but part of him began to wonder if the Salvor Empire's path was one that would lead to their own undoing. He had always believed that the ends justified the means, but now, As he stared out across the vastness of space, the weight of those words began to feel hollow. How many more systems would be destroyed in the name of this empire? How many more lives would be lost, sacrificed for the greater good of power? Despite his doubts, Xelur pushed them aside. He couldn't afford to falter now. The artifact was within reach, and the future of his empire rested on his shoulders. His fleet was assembled, and the final stages of preparation were underway. The time for questioning was over. It was time to execute his mission, to claim the artifact, and to secure the Salvor Empire's dominance over the galaxy. The enemy would not stand in his way. The artifact would be his, and the galaxy would bend to the will of the Salvor Empire. No one would stand against them, not now, not ever. The artifact that Commander Xelur was tasked with securing was no mere weapon of war. It was something far older, far more mysterious, and far more dangerous. Its origins were lost to time, shrouded in ancient myths passed down through the galaxy's oldest civilizations. These stories spoke of a force so powerful that it could warp the very essence of reality itself. For centuries, it had been nothing more than a legend, a whispered tale used to inspire fear and respect, to keep ambitious beings from chasing the impossible. However, the artifact's power was no myth. It was real, and it was waiting to be found. The artifact, according to ancient texts, had the ability to manipulate the very fabric of space and time. It could bend the laws of physics, control the movement of stars, and even alter the course of entire galaxies. In the right hands, it could become a weapon of unimaginable power, one that could not only annihilate entire fleets, but also rewrite the rules of existence itself. Some believed it could even grant its wielder immortality, allowing them to shape reality to their desires. Others thought it could act as a conduit for a higher cosmic force, one that would bestow its user with godlike abilities. The truth of its power, however, had been concealed for millennia. Those who had once known its true nature were long gone, their civilizations reduced to ruins, their knowledge scattered across the galaxy. The only thing left was the artifact itself, hidden away on a planet that was considered unreachable by most, until now. The location of the artifact was known to only a few, and Xelur was among the select few who had the privilege of knowing its coordinates. It was located on a remote, heavily guarded planet deep within enemy-controlled space. This planet, known only by its coded name, Xereth 9, was a place that no one dared approach. It was surrounded by a dense asteroid field, a natural barrier designed to keep outsiders from entering. The planet itself was a labyrinth of ancient ruins, some of which were older than even the Salvor Empire itself. Over the centuries, various factions had tried to find the artifact, but all had failed. None had been able to decipher the complex traps and obstacles that had been set up to protect it. Many had lost entire fleets in their attempts to breach the planet's defenses, yet the artifact remained hidden, guarded by ancient mechanisms that were beyond the understanding of even the most advanced civilizations. The artifact's very existence seemed to defy logic, as if it were not meant to be found by anyone. The Empire's intelligence had finally tracked down the artifact's location, but the journey to it was anything but simple. The planet was heavily fortified by a coalition of alien species, who had discovered the artifact long ago, and were determined to keep it out of the hands of any would-be conquerors. These species had banded together, not out of mutual trust, but out of a shared fear that the artifact's power, if unleashed, could destroy everything they had worked to protect. They had built an entire defensive infrastructure around the planet to guard the artifact, including high-tech weaponry and vast fleets of warships stationed at key points in space. Their strategy was clear: if anyone attempted to reach the artifact, they would face the full force of their combined military might. No one was to have it. No one was to control it. It was a power too dangerous to be wielded by anyone, and especially not by the Salvor Empire. The first sign of Xelur's mission came when his fleet breached the outer edges of Xereth 9's defensive perimeter. As they entered the system, they were immediately met with resistance. The defenders, aware of Xelur's reputation, had prepared for this moment. Their fleets mobilized with precision, engaging in battle as soon as they detected the Salvor forces. The fight that ensued was fierce and unforgiving. Xelur's fleet had been meticulously trained for such operations, and he commanded them with unparalleled skill. But the defenders of Xerath 9 were no less formidable. They fought with desperation, knowing that if they lost, the artifact would fall into the wrong hands. Every ship, every weapon, every tactic was focused on one goal: prevent the Salvor Empire from reaching the artifact at all costs. As Xelur's fleet pushed deeper into the system, they encountered new and advanced weaponry that was unlike anything they had faced before. The defending forces had access to technology that bent the laws of physics in ways that made Xelur's fleet seem primitive in comparison. Energy shields that could withstand the most powerful of blasts, weapons capable of tearing through the fabric of space itself, and defensive systems that could manipulate gravity to trap enemy ships. All these made the battle for Xerath 9 unlike any Xelur had ever fought. Despite the overwhelming odds, Xelur's forces continued to advance, determined to carry out their mission. The closer they got to the planet, the more intense the battle became. Space itself seemed to warp and twist around them, as if the planet's very presence was pushing back against them, refusing to let them enter. The true nature of the artifact was beginning to reveal itself in subtle ways. As the battle raged on, strange phenomena began to occur. The fabric of space and time around Xerath 9 began to flicker, shifting between alternate realities and timelines. Ships that entered the planet's orbit experienced time distortions, their sensors malfunctioning, and their crew members disoriented by sudden, unexplainable changes in their environment. It was clear that the artifact, though still hidden, was beginning to exert its influence over the system. Every attempt to approach it seemed to trigger more anomalies, gravitational anomalies, time loops, energy surges, that made it increasingly difficult for Xelur's fleet to maintain control. The artifact's power was not just a weapon, it was a force of nature, one that defied understanding and resisted manipulation. As Xelur's fleet reached the planet's surface, they were faced with even greater challenges. The planet was not just a physical barrier, it was a spiritual one. The ancient civilizations that had built the planet's defenses had created complex traps designed to keep anyone from accessing the artifact. These traps were not just technological, they were rooted in the very essence of the planet itself. The ancient ruins were filled with symbols and codes that no one had been able to decipher until now. As Xelvor's forces made their way through the labyrinth of ruins, they uncovered hints of the artifact's true purpose. It was not simply a tool of war. It was a key to something much greater, something that had been hidden from the galaxy for eons. The closer they got to the artifact, the more they realized that its power was not something that could be controlled. It was a force that could unravel everything, including the very concept of life itself. But Xelur had come too far to turn back now. The galaxy's future rested on his shoulders, and he would stop at nothing to claim the artifact, no matter the cost. Commander Xelur had always prided himself on his unwavering commitment to the Salvor Empire, and the cause he had spent his entire life serving. His loyalty was unshakable, or so he had believed. He had never questioned the orders given to him, never hesitated when it came to executing the will of the Empire. To him, the larger goal of the Empire's dominance over the galaxy justified the sacrifices made along the way. He had witnessed firsthand the devastation caused by war, the lives lost, the planets destroyed, but he had always maintained that it was necessary for the greater good. The Salvor Empire, after all, was a force that could bring order to the galaxy, a galaxy that had long been divided and torn apart by countless warring factions. Xelur saw himself as a protector of his people, ensuring their safety and security in a galaxy that was constantly at war. However, as he led his forces deeper into enemy territory, the reality of what he was fighting for began to weigh heavily on his conscience. The artifact, the one he had been tasked to retrieve, was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of ultimate power, the kind of power that could reshape the galaxy in a way that no one, not even Xelur himself, could predict. The deeper he ventured into enemy-controlled space, the more he began to question whether such a power should be in the hands of any one individual or empire. He had always believed that his people, the Xelur, were the rightful rulers of the galaxy. But now, as he faced the full scope of the devastation caused by his empire's conquest, He couldn't help but wonder if they were truly the right ones to wield such power. The artifact's origins were shrouded in mystery, its potential known only to a select few. What if the legends surrounding it were not just tales to instill fear in enemies but a warning? What if the artifact's true power was too great, too dangerous for anyone to control, let alone an empire that had already shown its willingness to destroy everything in its path for the sake of dominance? These thoughts began to plague Xelur's mind, especially as he neared the final stages of his mission. He had spent years preparing for this moment. But now that it was upon him, he realized that he might have been blind to the consequences of his actions. Could he really justify the endless destruction his empire had caused? Could he in good conscience claim the artifact, and use it to extend the reach of the Xelur Empire even further? As these doubts took root in his mind, Xelur found himself increasingly at odds with the very people he had once trusted without question. The higher-ranking officials of the Xelur Empire, those who had ordered him to undertake this mission, were not as concerned with the implications of the artifact's power as Xelur had become. For them it was simply a tool to be used in their quest for domination. They saw the galaxy as a prize to be won, a world to be molded to their will, and they believed that the artifact would give them the ultimate leverage in their campaign. The Empire's generals and politicians were consumed by their ambition, eager to gain control of the artifact, and use it to crush any remaining resistance to their rule. This blind ambition did not sit well with Xelur. He had always been a pragmatist, someone who valued the practical consequences of his actions over lofty ideals. But the more he thought about the Empire's goals, the more he began to see a disturbing pattern. The Xelur Empire was not seeking peace or stability, it was seeking power for power's sake. And Xelur had been an instrument of that power, an enforcer of the Empire's will. His personal sense of duty, his belief in the righteousness of his cause, had blinded him to the bigger picture. As the realization began to set in, Xelur found himself torn between his loyalty to the Empire and his growing doubts about the morality of their mission. His internal conflict grew more intense as he led his forces deeper into the heart of enemy territory. The further he traveled, the more Xelur saw the toll that war had taken on the galaxy. Planets had been reduced to rubble, civilizations had been annihilated, and entire species had been wiped out in the name of conquest. Xelur had once believed that the Xelur Empire was bringing order to chaos, but now, as he stood on the precipice of the ultimate weapon, he began to question whether their vision of order was simply another form of tyranny. The Empire's expansion had come at a cost, and the cost had been paid by innocent lives. Xelur's relationship with his soldiers also began to shift. He had always been a leader who commanded respect through fear and discipline, but as his doubts about the Empire grew, he began to see his soldiers differently. They were not just pawns in a larger game. They were individuals, each with their own hopes, dreams, and fears. Many of them had enlisted in the Empire's military because they believed in the cause, just as Xelur had. They too had been taught that the Empire's rise to power was inevitable and necessary. But now, as the realities of war set in, Xelur could see the cracks in the facade. Many of his soldiers had begun to question their own involvement in the conflict. Some were beginning to wonder whether they were fighting for the right side, while others were simply tired of the endless fighting. Xelur had always prided himself on his ability to inspire loyalty, but now, he found himself struggling to maintain that loyalty in the face of the mounting evidence that their cause might not be just. In the quiet moments between battles, Xelur would think about the families and children who had been displaced by the Empire's conquest, the survivors of destroyed worlds who had lost everything. He thought about the species who had fought to protect their homes, their cultures, and their way of life, only to be crushed by the relentless advance of the Xelur Empire. And as the artifact's power loomed ever closer, Xelur found himself at a crossroads. He could complete his mission and return to the Empire as a hero, having secured the artifact and cemented the Empire's domination over the galaxy. Or he could turn back, abandon the mission, and face the consequences of defying the very Empire he had sworn to protect. The weight of these decisions pressed down on Xelur's mind like a physical force, and for the first time in his life, he found himself questioning the very foundation of his beliefs. His loyalty to the Xelur Empire had always been unquestionable, But now, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance, Xelur wondered if his loyalty had been misplaced all along. Could the Empire as it stood truly be the best hope for the galaxy, or had it become something far darker, something that needed to be stopped before it consumed everything? As Commander Xelur approached the final stages of his mission, the reality of his actions and the weight of the choices ahead grew more pressing. His journey into enemy-controlled space had begun as an ambitious conquest to retrieve the artifact and secure the future of the Xelur Empire. But it had evolved into a deeply personal conflict. Xelur, a man of duty, had always seen his role as a protector of the Empire's vision, bringing order, stability, and unity to a galaxy fractured by constant warfare. But now, with each passing day, he felt the growing burden of his conscience, an awareness that perhaps the Empire's vision was not as noble as he had once believed. At the heart of Xelur's struggle was the artifact itself, an object of ancient and mysterious origins that had the potential to reshape the galaxy. The artifact's true power was still shrouded in secrecy, but its significance had become undeniable. The Xelur Empire had long coveted it, believing that its possession would grant them the power to crush any remaining resistance and solidify their dominance over the galaxy. But as Xelur drew closer to the artifact, the more he began to question the wisdom of such a pursuit. He had been tasked with securing the artifact, not just for the Empire, but for the power it promised. A power that could bring an end to the war, but also one that could plunge the galaxy into a new and even more devastating conflict. The more Xelur learned about the artifact, the more he realized that it was not merely a tool of war, it was a weapon, one that could tip the balance of power in ways that no one could fully comprehend. As Xelur's fleet advanced deeper into enemy territory, he witnessed firsthand the devastation that the Empire's conquest had wrought. Planets had been ravaged, entire species annihilated, and civilizations erased from existence in the name of bringing about the Empire's vision of order. The Xelur Empire, under the leadership of its highest officials, had shown no mercy in its drive to expand. Every resistance had been crushed, every obstacle removed. For Xelur, this had been part of the mission, necessary sacrifices in the name of a greater good. But now, as he stood on the precipice of securing the artifact, he began to see the consequences of his empire's ambition in a new light. The galaxy was not a canvas to be painted in broad strokes of conquest and control. It was a living, breathing entity, filled with cultures, histories, and people who had been forever scarred by the Empire's endless expansion. Xelur could no longer ignore the reality of the lives lost in the name of the Xelur's vision. The deeper Xelur went into enemy space, the more his perspective began to shift. He had always viewed the Xelur Empire as the ultimate force for good. Its order and control were necessary to prevent the galaxy from descending into total chaos. But now, in the face of the destruction wrought by his own actions, he began to question whether the Empire's vision of order was worth the cost. He realized that the Empire's methods were not those of a benevolent ruler but of a conqueror, a ruler who saw the galaxy as a prize to be taken, regardless of the consequences. The more he thought about it, the more Xelur understood that the Empire's sense of superiority had blinded it to the very real suffering it had caused. In their drive for dominance, the Xelur had lost sight of the values they had once claimed to uphold. They had become what they had once sought to destroy, a force of oppression and tyranny. As Xelur wrestled with these thoughts, the reality of the artifact's power loomed ever larger. It was a symbol of ultimate authority, capable of bending the will of entire civilizations to the desires of its wielder. The Empire saw it as the key to final victory, the means by which they would end the war and impose their rule on the galaxy once and for all. But Xelur began to see it differently. The artifact was not a tool for peace, it was a weapon of unimaginable destruction. If placed in the wrong hands, it could bring about the extinction of entire species and the annihilation of entire worlds. And the Xelur Empire, with its thirst for power, was not equipped to wield such a force responsibly. Xelur's growing sense of unease made him wonder if he could in good conscience hand the artifact over to the very empire he had fought to serve. Could he, as a commander of the Xelur military, justify the use of such a powerful weapon when he had seen firsthand the destruction that the Empire had already caused. The soldiers under his command were also beginning to question their place in the war. Many of them had enlisted because they believed in the Empire's mission. They had been taught that the Xelur Empire was the only force capable of bringing peace and stability to the galaxy. But as the war dragged on, and as they witnessed the destruction they were causing, many of them had begun to doubt the righteousness of their cause. Some soldiers had begun to question whether the galaxy would be better off under the rule of the Empire, while others simply wanted the fighting to end. The constant battles, the endless bloodshed, had taken a toll on everyone, including Xelur. He had always been a man of action, someone who believed in the necessity of war. But now, as he looked at the soldiers who had once fought with conviction, he saw a growing sense of disillusionment. The lines between right and wrong were becoming increasingly blurred, and Xelur could no longer deny that the Empire's cause might not be as just as he had once thought. In the quiet moments between battles, Xelur often found himself reflecting on the galaxy he was fighting to control. He thought about the countless species that had been wiped out in the name of the Xelur Empire's vision. He thought about the families torn apart by war, the children who had lost their homes, and the worlds that had been rendered uninhabitable by the Empire's military campaigns. It was impossible for him to ignore the devastation any longer. The galaxy was not a series of abstract political entities to be conquered. It was a place of life, of cultures, of histories, and Xelur had become a part of its destruction. This realization gnawed at him, forcing him to confront the darker side of the Empire's expansion. Could he continue to fight for a cause that had become so morally compromised? Could he still claim to be a servant of order when the Empire's methods were so clearly chaotic and destructive? Xelur had always prided himself on his ability to follow orders, to execute the will of the Empire without hesitation. But now, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance, he found himself questioning everything he had ever believed in. He had always thought of himself as a protector of peace, but now, as the weight of his mission bore down on him, he wondered if he had been nothing more than a tool of destruction. The Empire's goals were no longer clear, and neither was his role in the unfolding events. The artifact, which had once seemed like a symbol of hope and final victory, now felt like a harbinger of doom. As the final confrontation with the enemy neared, Xelur knew that his decision would determine not only his own fate but the fate of the galaxy itself. Would he continue to serve the Empire, securing the artifact, and bringing about its final conquest? Or would he take a stand against the Empire's unchecked ambition, risking everything to prevent the destruction of the galaxy? The choice was his, and it was one that would forever alter the course of history. As the battle for the artifact neared its climax, Commander Xelur faced the most significant decision of his life, one that would determine not just his future, but the future of the galaxy itself. The weight of his past actions, the destruction wrought by the Xelur Empire, and the realization of the galaxy's inherent complexities all weighed heavily on him. What had once been a clear-cut mission for the Empire now stood as a reflection of his deepest doubts and internal conflict. Xelur could no longer ignore the catastrophic consequences of the Empire's pursuit for power. He had seen the devastation firsthand, the lives lost, the worlds reduced to ashes, and felt the increasing burden of the decisions he had made in the name of a greater good. The artifact, the key to ultimate power, had become a symbol of the very thing he had grown to despise: the Empire's insatiable hunger for control at any cost. His understanding of peace, justice, and order had shifted. The lines between right and wrong had become impossible to distinguish, and the once clear vision of the Xelur Empire now seemed like a mirage, built on the backs of suffering and tyranny. As the final battle loomed, Xelur knew that his actions could either bring about a new era of dominance, or initiate a series of consequences that would destroy everything he had fought for. The galaxy had changed, and so had he. In the face of unimaginable power and the temptation to secure the artifact for the Empire, Xelur had to decide whether to continue down the path of conquest or risk everything to forge a new way, one that could potentially save the galaxy from further suffering. The choice was no longer just about the Xelur Empire's vision of order. It was about the greater good of the galaxy as a whole. Commander Xelur stood at the precipice of history, aware that this was not just a battle for the artifact. It was a battle for the soul of the galaxy itself. The future of countless civilizations rested on his shoulders, and the ultimate question remained. Would he choose to continue fighting for an empire that had lost its way, or would he make the ultimate sacrifice to prevent a new and devastating war? The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and only Xelur could decide its future.